Hello, and thank you for joining us for this installment of the Alumni Speaker Series. Today, I'm excited to have with me Rich Cisney. Rich is a 1989 graduate of Concord. He originally grew up in Northeast Ohio, but his mom was from West Virginia, and I think that kind of helped, I believe, push him to decide to go to college here, being familiar with the state. He was looking at Concord and Glenville and ended up choosing Concord because thankfully we had the major he was interested in. And after he did graduate from Concord, he spent 2 years as a television news photographer at WVVA TV, Channel 6, which is just down the road in Bluefield. And after a couple years there, in 1991, he actually moved down to Greensboro, North Carolina, and began working for WXII TV, which is Channel 12. Rich has worked there for 21 years on 3 separate occasions, and in 1994 was actually the recipient, along with his reporter, of the Detroit Press Club Golden Wheel Award for Excellence in Television Journalism. He is currently a morning photographer and editor at WXII and is married to his wife, Dwayna, who he actually met on a story. And they have 3 children, Michael, who is a U.S. Marine, and then he has identical twin daughters, Alexandra and Samantha, who are currently high school seniors. And today, Rich is going to talk to us about making your major your career, thoughts from the front lines. So with that, Rich, I just want to say welcome and thank you for joining us today.
I'm really honored that you would ask me to do this. This is something I'm really passionate about, letting people know. And if I use the term kids, I don't necessarily mean youngsters. I mean, I'm old enough that I can call somebody a kid and they can be 10 years younger than me. But I'm really looking forward to letting people know what they can expect when they go into this major, into this field. When they graduate from college. And I really appreciate the opportunity.
Appreciate you joining us. And we'll just get started with, maybe you could first share with us, kind of how was that transition, coming from Northeast Ohio, which is obviously very different from Southern West Virginia in many ways.
Yeah.
How was that transition coming into college and how did you adjust to that?
I'll tell you what, long story short, my senior year of high school, I applied and got accepted to Eastern Michigan University in Ypsilanti. And something went wrong somewhere. I don't know if it was a mail issue or whatever, but I never heard back from them after they told me I was accepted. So I took a year off. I was working at an apple orchard. And I will say this, if you're a farmer, you're not a slacker. I learned my work ethic from working at this orchard. And my boss told me, he said, take a year off and just do your thing and then go to college. And I took his advice, and it was really, really good advice. So I ended up, like you had mentioned, I chose between Glenville State, which is closer actually to where my family is, and Concord. But Concord had the broadcasting major. They had just started it. And I said, I want to do that. And so that's why I decided to go to Concord. And it was different. It was tough because about 10 days before I went to Concord, before I was supposed to leave, I had my appendix taken out. And while I was in the hospital recovering, my father died. And so within a space of 10 days before I went to Concord, I had 2, what most people would consider huge, tremendous life events happen to me. And I thought about staying home. I said, I'll stay home. I'll help my mom. And my mom's like, I know you. If you stay home, you won't ever go to school. And she forced me, I say forced. She encouraged me strongly to go to school. And my best friend, Marcos, and another good friend of mine, Brian, brought me down. We drove down to Concord, spent the night. And actually, Brian slept that night in a closet in Woodell Hall before they took off and went back to Ohio, and they left me there. And it was kind of weird because I was on my own. I mean, talk about sink or swim, but it was so much fun. And the people were so cool to me. And I remember my orientation leader, her name was Kim Carr. She was a Tri-Sig. I don't know why I still remember that, but she was so cool. and so helpful, and everybody there was just so great. And that was the impetus for getting me to go, to not just go throw my hands up and say the heck with this and go back home. And I'm really glad I stayed. I also thank God for that, because he had a lot to do with that, I believe.
Well, so do you think, was there one particular experience during your time at Concord that was maybe especially valuable to you in terms of preparation for your profession?
There's one big one and then one kind of small one that kind of leads into that. I mentioned being away from home. So I was 6 hours from home. I didn't have a car, and I was kind of in that, what should I do here? And my advisor, his name was Rick Bankston. He was a communications professor from 1985, I believe. And he left when I graduated in 1989. And he was my advisor. I consider him my mentor. And one Friday afternoon, everybody, when I went to Concord, it was kind of called a suitcase college. Everybody was there during the week. And then as soon as Friday afternoon hit, bang, the place emptied out. And about the only people that were left there were ones that like me, who, really couldn't go home so often. And he asked me, he's like, hey, you want to shoot a football game with me tomorrow? And I'm like, man, what the heck? I'm not doing anything else. And that's when I found out that I can shoot video like you wouldn't believe. I mean, it's totally a God thing. I've always said that God gives everybody one tremendous talent. It may be Picasso with the painting. It may be Eddie Van Halen with the guitar. And I've had people say, yeah, but what about the guy sleeping under the bridge at night? He could be the next great writer, but maybe he never got the chance. And so I was shown that I loved it, and I was good at it. And so I shot video every home football game after that. I was begging him to let me go down on the field, and finally it got to a point where he was like, I'm not going to bother coming into campus. Here's where the camera is. You go shoot the game. And that was a big thing too. The other big thing, the bigger thing, I think, was the fact that I took advantage of my internship. In my senior year, I got an internship at WVVA, working in the sports department. And it was your typical internship. You're not getting paid. You're just doing grunt work. I mean, I wasn't fetching coffee or anything. I was, if any of you, the kids, and again, I say kids with I love the students. They probably don't know what a Rolodex is, but he had a Rolodex with hundreds of cards in it of like contacts for the sports director at Mount Hope High School, or the football coach at North Fork or something. It was, and I had to like kind of consolidate them and update them and that kind of thing. So for 3 weeks, I did nothing but just grunt work. And it got to a point, I was going in every day for like 3 or 4 hours and going, driving to WVVA. I had this old beater car. It was an old Chevy Caprice, and I was putting literally $2 worth of gas in it at it was called the Deli Mart then, that convenience store there, right, as you're going out of town, right? And I was putting $2 worth of gas in it every time I went. It got to a point where I just couldn't afford to. And but anyway, I was able to continue the internship, and that was what led me to end up getting a part-time job at WVVA as a production assistant, and then going full-time for my second semester of my senior year. So my second semester, I carried a full course load, like 21 hours or something, and worked a full-time job. And that's what the internship is what led me to where I am now. And that's the biggest thing I would say. Don't treat an internship like it's just, I'm going to fetch coffee and I'm going to learn how to shuffle some papers, or I might learn a little bit from this guy or that woman. It's, you only get out of it what you put into it. And I was blessed, and I worked with a lot of great people. And that's the biggest thing I would say. That the one thing that I got from Concord was the opportunity to do that internship and take what I learned at school and use it in the real world. Because I literally was using it in the real world. I was sitting behind the audio board when Bill Huffman and Sherry Haig and Stan Sweet and Woody Morgan were doing the weather and the sports and everything. And I was sitting there and bringing that out to the people who were watching. And I learned all that at Concord.
Great. That sounds like this was a perfect internship. That's what they really should do. So that
Absolutely.
sounds like great.
It was absolutely perfect. I would not trade it for anything in the world.
Great. So how different has work been for you during the pandemic? I'm sure, I know things have changed for everybody. So kind of in your profession, how has it looked different over the past year?
You know what? When it kind of hit, when the pandemic hit, we were all kind of like, wow. We noticed we started, I'm a morning photographer and editor, so I do a lot of editing. We do 4.5 hours of news in the morning. So I help, and we have a few editors, and I help them edit. And I noticed it was like, there's this pandemic, there's this thing in China, and you would edit a little some story here, some story there. And then it got to a point where we were starting to do a lot more stories on it. And I started noticing that and going, we're doing a lot of stories on this pandemic. And then it was bang. It felt like it blew up in 1 week. And the biggest thing, I think there's a lot of big, I say the big thing, but there's a lot of big things that's caused things to change for how we do things. How we cover news is different. I mean, normally when we go out and do an interview with somebody, you go out, you put a microphone in front of them, you ask them some questions. Well, now you got to do that social distancing thing. So now we've all got these microphone stands where we put them out and they stand behind them. And, actually it's a little bit easier for the photographer. I will say that. But there are just things like that. On-air quality, I think the video that we put on the air has suffered because, we're using a lot of Zoom interviews, and let's face it, Zoom, while this looks good to you and I, it's not broadcast quality, but it's all we got. So we use it. And sometimes the video quality is not great. There are mornings when I'm pulling my hair out because the words and the lips don't match. They're like a half a second off, try to get them to match so it doesn't look like they're saying one thing, but their lips are saying another. And so those are the kinds of things that have really, those are two things in that perspective that have really changed. Another thing is staffing issues. And it's funny that you mentioned this today, because yesterday I had to go down and check out something in downtown Winston-Salem. It turned out to be nothing. I drove back to the station, and I was pulling in. Our lead morning editor was pulling out. He's a good friend of mine. We all joke around. We're all good friends. We all joke around. He pulls out, and I said, "Where the heck are you going? We still got a lot of editing to do." And he said, "I'm being quarantined. My son has COVID." And his son's 2. And I went, okay. And he's like, "I'll call you later." And he said, "Do me a favor. Go in and turn off my computer." Because he had been in there all morning long editing. His computer's still up. And I went in, and my supervisor was on the phone, and I started to walk into his edit bay, and my supervisor was like, "Don't go in there. I got this. I'll take care of it." And so, 10 minutes later, he's in there with a can of Lysol, and he's got gloves and masks and everything. And now I find out he's going to be out for 3 weeks because of our company's policy is if you're exposed to someone that has it, that literally has it, you're out for 3 weeks. That's at the outset. And so now we've got to shift people to cover his shift, which means somebody else is going to have to cover the guy who's shifting to cover him. And that leaves me covering, it's just everybody's shift is kind of changing. And the staffing issues have been really crazy like that. I got kind of caught up in it a little bit. I got exposed to someone who potentially had it. And luckily it was the day before Thanksgiving, and I was off for Thanksgiving and the day after. So I missed 1 day at work, and I got tested and I was fine. So I was able to go back. But it's things like that. The staffing issues are a big deal too. That's really affected us. There are a couple things. the other thing is, the other big thing is a lot of I think all of our meteorologists do the weather from home. Our morning meteorologist, our main meteorologist, Lainey Pope, does hers from home. And some of the anchors do theirs from home. They've got all the computer setups and everything, so they know what to say, they know what the scripts are and things. But I don't get to see them. These are people I work with every day. And a lot of them I don't work with much, but at least I know them and they know me, and I don't get to see them anymore. I mean, they're not around. Just before this thing happened, we were scheduled to get a new newsroom. We've had the same newsroom for about 20 years, and they had this big plan. We're going to do this. I mean, they literally knocked down walls and tore things out. And that was supposed to start about April 1st. Well, then the pandemic hits the middle of March, and it was like, well, do we want to cancel this? But we'd already scheduled it with this company that was going to spend 2 months redoing our newsroom. If we cancel it, who knows when we can do it again? And they decided, we're going to go ahead and do it. And they did. And now we've got this really nice news set, and it looks really cool. But the newsroom itself, I mean, it's kind of barren. There are desks there. Nobody sits at them. You know, I probably don't go in there twice a week. And if I do, it's just because I happen to wonder, gee, I can't find so-and-so. I wonder if they're in here. And I go look, who's not in here, and I leave. Right. And that's kind of sad, because the newsroom is kind of the hub for a news organization, especially the assignment desk. That's where it's like, hey, where can I go to the assignment desk? You'll find it there. And nobody sits there because everybody's in different parts of the building trying to stay away. And that I didn't realize that until just a few months ago. It's like, I don't see my friends anymore. I mean, I see the core group of people I work with, but the ancillary ones that I know and really like and talk to and that kind of thing, I haven't seen them. I don't get to talk to them. Yeah. It really has.
It's big changes for all of us, for sure.
Yes, definitely. And I'm not. Ours isn't the only profession that's going through the same darn thing. I haven't, since this whole thing has happened, I haven't seen one salesperson in our station, because they're all able to work from home, and God bless them for being able to do that. One of them just retired, and he's a good guy. And the only time I ever saw him was in the hallway, because sales is kind of, I'd see him in the hallway because their offices are away from ours. And I'd see him, and he's always a great guy. We'd chat a minute and that kind of thing. He retired, and it's like, I need to get a phone number so I can call and congratulate him, Oh,
yeah. That's right. Well, do you think, were there some things that school maybe did not prepare you for once you got out into the real world, so to speak, that you could share with anybody considering a career in this profession?
I sat and thought about that for a good 15 minutes. Uh-oh, Layla. Okay. I sat there and thought about that for a good 15 minutes, and it was really hard to come up with something. The only thing I could think of is maybe the fact that in what I do and the perception of television is that it doesn't pay as much as a lot of people think. I mean, if you're an anchor and you make a pretty good living, that kind of thing. The guy running the cameras behind the studio, he's not making six figures. But you don't find that out until you get into it. But by the time you get into it, if you really like what you're doing, it doesn't really matter. And I often tell people this, and I don't want to disparage any other occupation at all. I say it's kind of like being a cop or a fireman. Now, I can say that because I've got a cousin that's a sheriff's deputy in Cleveland, Ohio. His brother is a firefighter and a paramedic. If there's anybody that does something for little pay but enjoys what they do, it's them. It's kind of like you do it because you love the job. And we've got some people. I'm one of 5 people that have been there over 20 years. And we've moved here from wherever. I came from Ohio via West Virginia. A couple of them are from other parts of the country, St. Louis, that kind of thing. We came here for the job, and we like it here. and we've decided we're going to put down roots, and we stay, we raise families, we get married, we meet our wives on stories, and we decided to stay. You don't do it for the money. You definitely don't do it for the money. That wasn't explained to me. Of course, I didn't go to Concord going, I'm going to go into TV and make $20 million a year. I said I had originally applied and been accepted to Eastern Michigan University. I was going to go there and be a stockbroker. I was going to major in finance because somebody told me, dude, you'll make like $400,000 a year. Well, in 1984, I was thinking, I had dollar signs in my eyes. Ching, ching. I'm going to make a boatload of cash. Thankfully, I didn't have that notion when I went to Concord and got out and got into the real world. Honestly, when I started at Concord, when I started at WVVA, right after, I actually started as a full-time television news photographer at WVVA 3 weeks before graduation from Concord. And I walked across the stage with one of those little mic flags on my, it's got the little number on it. Yeah, I had it on my mortarboard. And that was back in the day. Nobody really did that kind of thing, but I did. And I put it on my mortarboard and I walked across the stage. And Dr. Jerry Beasley was the president, and he started his first year at Concord was my freshman year, and I love the guy. And I walked across the stage and I reached out to shake his hand to get my diploma, and he looked at my mortarboard and he looked at me and he's like, "I guess there's not a whole lot of doubt what you're going to be doing with your life." Is sir, took the diploma and walked off the stage, and that was. That was something that wasn't explained to me about the whole money thing, but I didn't care. I left there and went to work at WVVA, and I made $6 an hour. Now, that was 31 years ago, but at the time, I look at it now and go, man, but you do it because you love it. You do it for the joy of what you do.
Was there anything so far that you've dealt with in your career that really stuck out in your memory? Maybe a certain story or experience that you'd like to share?
You know what? There have been, I've done so many stories I've been doing this for, you count up all the years together, 25, 26 years. And there have been so many stories. They all start to run together, quite honestly, but some do stick out. There was one we did with a woman who, she was renting a house that she had no water, and she was literally going down to a stream down the road and getting water out of the stream in a bucket so that she could cook with, so she could, bathe. And my reporter and I went and did a story on it, and it led to this guy basically seeing her story on the air and realizing that that's his tenant. He went and fixed her water.
Oh, wow.
The thing about it wasn't just that we did the story. It was, we went back and kind of did a follow-up, and she was crying and she hugged us and thanked us for helping her to get water so she could turn on her faucet and get a glass of water and and put a load of laundry in the washer and do her dishes with hot water and soap. And I went, wow. I mean, that kind of the longest time, that was my litmus test into this is why I did this. This is why I got into this. I mean, that's probably the one story that I always remember. It was just incredible. In more recent memory, it's probably the stuff that's gone on with the elections. Things are so different. I don't want to say I'm going to get on a soapbox, but I want to explain how things are. Things with the media right now are a little tenuous. Our President Trump was not a fan of the media. And he made it well known. Back in 2016, when he was running for president, we covered him. We covered Hillary Clinton. We covered Tim Kaine, Hillary's running mate, and we covered Mike Pence, Donald Trump's running mate. every time they were in the state of North Carolina, we were there. And it was a long few months before the election because we were just always on the road. And it was tough when President Trump would stand at the podium and say, look at the media. And there's 75 or 80 of us all crammed onto a little, what looks like a soccer riser, and he'd go, they're all liars. And 13,000 people would turn around and boo us or worse, and I'm thinking, I'm in the middle of my third 16-hour day this week. I haven't seen my kids since Sunday. I'm not the bad guy here. And what I think the issue was there are some networks can be a little more biased. There are some liberal networks. There are some conservative networks. For those of us on the front lines, the ones of us who just go to work every day, we can't do that. We can't be biased. In fact, my company has a policy. When it gets to where we're into the political season, we have to keep a log of exactly how many minutes and seconds each candidate spends in advertising time, and also if they're on TV and they're running for office. So if I go to some event, say it's a groundbreaking for some company that's coming to Greensboro, and we go to this groundbreaking and we interview a county commissioner and he's running for office, we have to log that because we got to make sure we give his opponent an equal amount of time. I mean, our company's really, really tight about that. We can't do the whole, well, we're backing this guy and the other guy can go, somewhere else. So that was what was tough. Is I honestly think that he while he looped us all together and said we're all the same, we're not. I mean, those of us in the local media, the local TV stations, local newspapers can be biased. We can't. So that was a tough thing to get through. It really was. And then of course we've got, what happened with the recent election. There was some concern about the election. Election actually that night wasn't so bad, but then of course, in January 6th, when everybody stormed the Capitol, and then it was like, okay, the inauguration's coming up, and we had armed guards at our station to protect us, and we were put on kind of a nobody goes anywhere alone. If there was hey, Rich, there's an accident on I-40, well, Rich has got to have somebody go with him to cover his back because we just didn't know what was going to happen. Those are probably that's probably the biggest thing in all the years I've been doing this. This year, the last 3 months have been a real eye opener. It's really made me open my eyes and go, wow, things are so different. We've been fortunate we didn't have anything bad happen to us, but there was that potential, and thankfully my company didn't pull any punches. But it's kind of unnerving to see a guy wearing khakis and a blue suit and a bulge on his hip walking down your hallway while you're going to microwave ramen noodles at 3 a.m. Hey, how are you? So anyway.
Well, do you have any advice or suggestions for students or even recent graduates who are maybe considering a career in TV media? Any tips you could share with them?
Oh, do I ever? I was adding some today as I was driving home from work. There's quite a few. I guess one of the first things I would say is take advantage of any opportunity. A lot of students, a lot of the kids that are going to graduate here soon or are going to go into this profession may be looking to be a reporter. That opportunity may not be there. Maybe it will, and that's great. If it is, wonderful. Grab it and run with it. If it's not, there are always other ways to do things. There's a girl who's now a reporter in somewhere on the East Coast of North Carolina. I can't remember which one of the 3 stations it is. Anyway, she started out with us as a production assistant, just running the cameras for the news. And then she said, you know what, I might like to be an editor. So she became an editor. Then she started shooting her own stuff. Then she's like, hey, I'm leaving for Macon, Georgia. I'm a reporter now. And now she's on her second reporting job. She kind of came in the back door. She didn't just graduate and go, bang, I'm a reporter. She came in the back door. And so there's always an opportunity to do that. That's how, like I mentioned, that's kind of how I fell into where I did. I came in as an unpaid sports intern and, got a job working production. And then it was like I started helping out the weekend guy, who his name was Chuck Strickler. I can seem to remember some of these names, but they're the people that made the most impact on my career. Chuck Strickler was our weekend anchor, and I would just go in and help him shoot. I'd go shoot all his stories, and then he'd come in, and I would edit all his stories, but he would write them, and then I would run back real fast to the back of the station to do my full-time job because I was just that's one of them. Take advantage of any opportunities you get. If you don't get into what you want to do, take advantage of the opportunities that you're given. Along the same lines, there was a guy back in 2011, the United States U.S. Figure Skating Championships were taking place here in Greensboro. And I was going out there every day and doing stories, and our sports guy was meeting me there later. So I'd go out, and I was sitting there eating in the media lounge one day. This kid comes up and he says, hey, I go to UNCG, University of North Carolina at Greensboro. I go to UNCG and I want to get into sports and da, da, da. And I said, well, my sports guy will be here later. If you want to come and say hi, I'll introduce you. I'm thinking I'll never see the kid again. Well, dang if he didn't show up. And so I said, Kenny, this is Brian. Brian, this is Kenny. 2 weeks later, I'm walking through our newsroom and I said, Brian? And he said, hey, guess what? I'm a sports intern. And I went, good for you. That's awesome. Because that's how I started out. Yeah. 2 weeks later, he's like, hey, guess what? I'm a part-time sports producer now. And I'm like, man, that's awesome. Good for you. What I didn't know was because I worked 9 to 6. So I was leaving at 6 o'clock every day. What I didn't know was after the newscast at 11, he was going and practicing and taping him doing the sportscast. He ended up going to Memphis, Tennessee, and now he's on Fox Sports Radio. If you listen to Fox Sports Radio and you hear Brian Fenley, that's the guy. That's the kid. And he, to this day, he'll still say, you gave me my shot. And I'm like, dude, all I did was introduce you to the sports guy. You took it and ran with it. I didn't do anything other than introduce you and say, congratulations, thumbs up. And you took it from there. And it's kind of the attitude you got to have, this business especially. And I've got, like I said, I've got bunches of other tips. Be a good employee, but don't be singularly focused. You want to be that person that management looks to for direction and ideas, especially having good story ideas. Having good story ideas is crucial. Everybody, when you do the morning meeting, it's like, come up with story ideas, bring us your story ideas. You're going to have to dig hard to find story ideas. And I'm not just talking reading the front page of the Bluefield Daily Telegraph and then going in and saying, well, it says here in the Telegraph that last night the Board of Commissioners did whatever. There are other ways you get story ideas. One of them was our right before I left WVVA, our news director. We got a new news director right before I left. He said, how many of you have business cards? Of course, we all did. He said, how many of you gave them to your friends and family to show them you worked in TV and the rest of them are sitting in a box in the corner of your drawer? And we're like, yeah, that was me. He said, I used to have a guy that I worked with that would come to the morning meeting every morning with 8 story ideas. And he gave those cards out like they were water. And he said, he was like, why are you ordering so many cards? Because he gave them to the toll booth worker on 77. He gave them he might come out of a convenience store and see some city employees fixing a water main. He'd hand out 8 cards. And the next thing you know, the guy's got all these story ideas. It's places like that. Your church. Our church does a big book sale every year. Well, guess what? Rich does a story on the church book sale every single year. I belong to the Elks Lodge. I'm an officer here. And every year we do a thing with the Boy Scouts where we dispose of American flags. Because of our story we ended up putting a big bin out in front of the Elks Lodge where people can drop off their American flags that are tattered or torn so that they can be disposed of properly. The Boy Scouts get to earn their merit badge once a year. Fire department comes out. It's a big deal. It's places like that. You're going to find, once you get into it, you'll find stories where you don't think you're going to find them. I mean, it's just amazing. I've been walking my dog. I've gotten more story ideas walking my dog down the street than I can shake a stick at. Now, most of them I haven't been able to do, but the ones that I have, they've been great ideas. But don't be, I kind of got sidetracked on that one, but don't be singularly focused. God bless her, I had a reporter that was really good at what she did, and she left us recently and went to her hometown of Cincinnati to work at the station she grew up watching when she was a child. And she's, as far as I know, I haven't heard from her very much, so as far as I know, she's doing very well. But she was so focused on what she didn't really have much of a life. I can remember my boss calling me one day and he said, "What time did you get back today?" And I'm like, 10. Why? He's like, "What time did you leave?" 12. "What'd you have to do?" And he's asking all these questions. I said, "Why are you asking me?" He said, "Because it's 4:30 in the afternoon and she's still here." She's been 13 hours. I mean, she had nothing else in her life other than work. And then she had church, but then once the pandemic hit, that kind of threw a kibosh on that. So she spent all her time at work. And it's like, you got to have something else. You've got to have your hobbies. You got to take time for yourself. You got to have the things that you like to do for yourself. I like my job. I enjoy it. I don't get up in the morning and go, "Oh gosh, I got to go to work." I enjoy going to work and doing what I do. But man, I can't wait for time to go home because I like to go, I've got a bunch of different hobbies. I like to brew beer. I like to check out graveyards. I'm a member of the Elks Lodge. I hang out with them. I take my dogs on walks. I hang out with my daughters when they're not Zooming into classes and stuff. You got to take time for yourself. And so that's a big tip too, is don't get so focused on work that you forget to take time for yourself. I mean, if you're into, a lot of people nowadays are into running and sports and heck, even playing around a golf once a week. Do that. Just don't get too involved in in the business. Another big thing I would say is when you make friends outside of television. Television is a very nomadic business. You go where the jobs are. When you and I don't mean to disparage accountants or doctors, but if you major in accounting, you can put a shingle out in front of your house that says, John Doe, certified public accountant. When you work in television, there are only so many places in America you can work. In North Carolina, the big ones are Charlotte, Raleigh, in our market, Winston-Salem, Greensboro, High Point. There's a few small stations on the coast, a couple in the mountains, and that's it. So you're going to end up probably moving to a place that you've never been before, and you probably never even thought you'd live. If somebody would told me I was going to live in Bluefield, if somebody had told me I was going to live in Greensboro, North Carolina when I was in high school, I'd been like, what the heck's in Greensboro? But I've been here for almost 30 years, give or take a couple years here and there. But find friends outside of television. Because if you're going to be a transient person and you're going to go to some small market, Missoula, Montana, or, San Luis Obispo, California, and you end up with somebody there who's from somewhere else, the tendency is that you all be friends because you're all working together, and then you all hang out together. And then what do? You talk about nothing but work. And that can be a killer. It really, you got to get away from the business. You've got to get away from your job. Like I said, I'm a member of the Elks Lodge. I hang out with those guys all the time. We're very involved in our church. So I've got church friends. I've got family friends. I've got neighbors in my neighborhood. You got to find other ways, whether you go to the gym and you end up hanging out with people and go, hey, after the gym, let's go to the Starbucks and get a coffee. you got to find your you got to find friends in other places other than your job, because those are the ones that are going to keep you fresh and keep you thinking about other things other than work. And that's a very important thing. Okay. The other thing, don't burn bridges. Television is a very small community. You don't know that the person that when you leave your station and you tell that producer he or she can kiss your butt and you wave bye-bye, that in 5 years, they're the news director at the station that you really want to get a job at. It's a very small community. And so I advise you not to burn bridges. You had mentioned that I've been here at WXII for 21 years on 3 different occasions. I worked here from 91 to 95. When I left WVVA, I came down here. My ex-wife and I went to Charlotte. I was there for a few years. I came back to WXII in 2002. I was there for 12 years. My current wife and my family and I moved to Austin, Texas for a year and a half, and I came back in 2015. So I've been back for 5 years. Every time I left under good terms. And when I needed a job and I came back, they were like, welcome. You know, I didn't burn any bridges. I made friends, and I was a good employee. And, you know, as hard as that can be sometimes, because let's face it, you don't always get along with people you work with, but you don't want to burn bridges in this business, because you never know, like I said, who's going to be the person that might be deciding whether to hire you later on. When I came back in 2015, and when we came back from Texas, the guy that hired me back, I've known him since I was here in 1991. And he said, I'm not hiring you again. And I said, that's okay. I'm going to chain myself to that oak tree out back, and you're going to have to cut down the oak tree to get me out of here, because I'm not leaving, which is a little joke we have amongst each other. But those are probably the main tips I would have for people. There's so many more. I wish I could think of them all and write them all down. But those are a few important ones that I think of.
Well, I think that all sounds like really great advice. And so I definitely appreciate you sharing that, putting that out here so we can share it with our students and those graduates out there.
The kids.
That's right. Share it with the kids. Well, so, and as we start to wrap up here, I guess my final question for you would be, considering how much the field has changed over the last several years, what do you see coming for it in the future?
Well, we've started to see it at my particular station. Most stations now are hiring a lot of what we call MMJs, multimedia journalists, also known as one-man bands or backpack journalists, where basically, used to be back in the day, you were a reporter and you got a photographer. The photographer shot the story. He edited the story that you wrote, and that's the way it worked. Now, straight out of college, a lot of places are hiring MMJs. They hire them, and the MMJ is responsible for coming up with the story, going out to the story, shooting the interviews, writing the story, editing the story, and in a lot of cases doing their own live shots. So that's the biggest thing. That's what's changed. I'm guessing a lot cheaper to have one person do it than to have 2 people do it. Our station just started hiring MMJs within the last couple months. And we were kind of bummed about that, because we were kind of, we were like, we were one of those stations where our reporters get a photographer. All they have to worry about is writing and stuff. We take care of the other stuff. And now it's kind of changing. But we're also finding out that because of that, there are no more photographers. I asked my boss, we were, I said, he said something about hiring somebody. And I said, surely there's a photographer in Missoula, Montana, who wants to come here to a bigger city, make more money, and have an opportunity to do bigger things. And he's like, people in Missoula, Montana hire MMJs. There are no photographers. And if there are, they're guys that have been there 20 or 30 years. They've put down roots. They've raised their family, raised their kids. They're not leaving. And I went, wow, I never thought about that. So that's the biggest thing is MMJs are going to become more the norm. Since the pandemic, one of the things that was kind of the bane of our existence was having to do live shots and going out in the big van with the big metal pole up in the air and that kind of, I've done to do those things for so many years. Once the pandemic hit, quite honestly, we quit using those things. Those things literally sit in our parking lot. We go out every couple of weeks and crank up the engine and let it run for half an hour, just to keep the oil running, but they haven't moved because of one of the other changes in technology, which is now we have, I don't know what they're actually called. Ours are known as TVUs. It's a little backpack unit that lets you go live as long as you've got cell signals. Now they're not going to work in the middle of Raleigh County out by out by Whitesville or something because there's probably not enough cell towers. Where we're at, they work fine. But you can take those things out and go live. Well, if you got one of those, why drive a big van that weighs 10,000 pounds and gets 6 miles to the gallon when you can carry this little backpack around and go anywhere? So those two things are the biggest things that are changing really in the business. That's pretty much it. Those two things.
Well, Rich, I really enjoyed talking with you, and I appreciate you sharing all this. Is there any closing thoughts, anything we haven't touched on you want to share before we wrap up?
One of the things that I thought about the other day was social media. There's a lot of social media has played a big part in what we do. Every station, at least my station, has an Instagram account. I don't even know if we have a Snapchat. I'm not on anything except Twitter. I'm pretty active on Twitter. I don't even have a Facebook account. So those kinds of things. But reporters are expected to contribute not just the story for TV, but also on all the social media channels. So they got to write up a story for Facebook and the web, and Snapchat, and take pictures of the scene and feed them in and send them in, that kind of thing. So there's just a lot more things to do. I would advise reporters to, and I've known a few that have done this. They've got their TV account and they've got their personal account. They got the one that people that watch them on the news are going to go to and go, "Oh, hey, Nicole, I liked your story you did, blah, blah, blah," And then they got the one where mom says, "Oh, honey, you really ought to see this cute thing I bought for Johnny," that kind of stuff. You need to have probably some separate accounts just to keep from, for one thing, to keep yourself, your own private life private, and trouble if you post something you probably shouldn't have on an account where the general public where the viewing public is going to see it. Social media is obviously going leaps and bounds. We had a meeting not real awful long ago where somebody asked, our focus used to be on TV. What is our focus now? And they were like, well, it's neck and neck, but it's leading more towards social media because that's where most people get their news now, is social media and that kind of thing. So we kind of have to adapt. And so just I would advise the kids, keep that in mind, that you're going to have to, what you do on TV is also going to have to be something you do for social media.
Right. Well, again, Rich Cisney, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We appreciate you sharing your words of wisdom about your field, and are proud to call you a Concord grad. And so thank you for joining us. And thanks to everybody who has viewed this, and stay tuned for more episodes of our Alumni Speaker Series. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.